Before we get started with the episode, did you know that Talk Music Talk has its very own app? That's right, it's a free app for iPhone and Android. With the app, you get every single episode, you get the back catalog. New shows will automatically appear in your feed. And with the app, you can download shows so you can listen to them offline. You can also star your favorite episodes. You can share episodes through social media, or you can email directly right from the app. That's right. It is in the iTunes Store, Google Play, Amazon app. Again, it is free. All you have to do is search for Talk Music Talk. And once you subscribe, leave a rating and or review to help spread the word. It helps increase visibility for the podcast. And now for today's episode. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boyce. This is Boyce and this is my podcast. Thank you so much for checking it out. Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I, Boyce, have long-form discussions with people who are connected to music in some way. Music therapists, music journalists, singers and songwriters and musicians, people behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. And on episode number 89, I had the pleasure of speaking to Johnny Temple. Johnny is the founder and publisher of Akashic Books. It is an independent press based in Brooklyn. Started in 96, initially as a record label before transitioning solely to books. It was funded with money from Johnny's band, Girls Against Boys, where he is the bassist, when they signed a major label deal back in the 90s. Akashic Books have released over 400 titles. Their first book was The Fuck Up by Arthur Nersessian. They've released books by Marlon James, his debut back in 2005, John Crow's Devil. And Marlon James recently won the Man Booker Prize for A Brief History of Seven Killings, which is a great book that I am currently reading. They have also published imprints from Dennis Cooper and Mobb Deep's Prodigy. They released a very successful book, the Go the Fuck to Sleep title. And coming out this year, Ziggy Marley's first cookbook, which Johnny talks about. We also discussed how Akashic got started. We talked about publishing, the challenges and rewards, working with authors, the challenges and the rewards. We also talked about Johnny's music career and so much more. This great interview, was recorded at the Akashic Books office in Brooklyn, so you will hear some random office sounds in the background. You're going to enjoy this interview very much. I did. It was a pleasure to talk to and meet Johnny. Here it is, episode number 89 with Johnny Temple on Talk Music Talk. Enjoy. I know initially Akashic was started to be a record label.
Yes.
Whatever happened to the record label?
Yeah, well, my dream had always been or one of my dreams had been to start a record label. I had no intention of publishing books. I liked the idea of running a record label. I think of it as being sort of akin to being a DJ, which is what I feel about being a book publisher. Okay. Ultimately, I'm trying to be a DJ, in a sense. And then, so when my band Girls Against Boys in 1996 signed a big record deal with Geffen Records, we made a bunch of money. And for the first time in my life, I had some disposable income. And I decided, I realized, wow, I can finally do this record label that I had been wanting to do. And I did it and put out a few records, which were very good. But the fact of the matter was, in 1996, 1997, there were hundreds, probably thousands of really good indie rock, punk rock record labels. And there absolutely was not a need for another one. And that didn't stop me from trying to do it. But as soon as I was doing it, I realized what was problematic about it. Any musician that was band or musician that was half decent at that time in that punk rock, indie rock world had a record label and probably had a good record label. And I thought, because my band was quite popular at the time, that it would give me more of a platform from which to succeed running a record label.
Okay.
But there were these other great labels that had been going for many years or a few years. And again, it was just there just wasn't a need for it. And I started the company with my two dear friends, Bobby Sullivan and Mark Sullivan, who were brothers and fellow musicians in the DC punk world. And they had a band together at that time called Sevens. And that band inspired, I said to them, hey, I kind of want to start a record label. Would you guys be interested in doing this? And what about doing the label together? They came on board. So we started this thing. Mark Sullivan, meanwhile, in addition to being a musician, was writing novels.
Yeah.
And he was having trouble getting them published. So that put us in the frame of mind of publishing books in addition to doing the music. And we didn't end up publishing Mark's book until several years later, but it was his book, Jonah Sees Ghosts, that novel, that really planted the seed of doing a book publishing company. Then we ended up publishing the first book in 1997 that Akashic published was The Fuck Up by Arthur Nersessian, a really, really great novel that also sold very well. So it was a great book to start with because it got an immediate response. It had a provocative title, but more importantly, the book itself was, even better than the provocative title. It's a really great novel. And the experience of publishing that book was pretty much exactly what I had always wanted out of doing a record label. Okay. And there weren't hundreds or thousands of indie book publishers at the time. There were like 7 of them.
Okay.
And so on various levels, it was a much more rewarding experience than doing a record label. There weren't a lot of other people doing it. There was a need for it, and there were really, really talented writers who had written full books, and they couldn't get those books published. So even though in the music world I was a successful musician, the music I could get my hands on as a successful musician was not as good as the books I could get my hand on as someone who knew nothing about book publishing. So, I went where the need was, along with Mark and Bobby. In the next couple of years, Bobby and Mark both started families. And in their early years of, doing an indie record label or book publishing company, it's basically you're hemorrhaging money.
Yeah.
So they couldn't really afford, with having, new children and new families, to be sinking all their time and money into something that wasn't going to be profitable for another decade. Yeah. I, on the other hand, had no family and was making a really good living as a musician still. So they dropped out on me pretty early on, and then I just kept it going.
Did you have a aesthetic for the publishing for Akashic as for books? Like
an aesthetic, you say?
Yeah, or just stuff you liked?
I did. And in fact, I think in some ways it remains very evident in what we publish, though it has evolved a lot, and I've pursued many new directions, me and my staff. In terms of, in the very beginning, I've always been drawn to novels, literary novels that explore dark themes, often in a disconsolate manner. In my mind, a lot of classic American literature falls into this category, which would include writers from John Steinbeck to William Faulkner to Richard Wright and all the way up to Toni Morrison. All of those writers write very dark material almost exclusively, or wrote, because most of the writers I mentioned are no longer living. I think Toni Morrison is the only one living. And so that was what I was interested in doing, and I think that the first 4 books that we publish, you can really see that. It's a diverse group of books, but it's writers who are unafraid to sort of explore the dark side of the human spirit. not in a nihilistic way, although there is some nihilism in some of those books. But I feel that in American liberalism, in particular white liberalism, has gotten very caught up with political correctness. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because political correctness to me is about fighting for what's right, fighting for, fighting against racism, sexism, homophobia. That's what political correctness grows out of, and I fully support that. Yeah. But I think that sometimes among liberals there is an inclination to kind of inadvertently box people in. And I think that also liberals can be very culturally tepid, which is in some reason why it took a long time for left-wing punk rockers to build bridges with the broader American left, because the broader American left would see punks and they would hold their noses and think that's low culture. And I think there's a lot of elitism in liberalism. And so book publishing is a very liberal pursuit. A lot of people in book publishing are sort of privileged liberals.
And having your band, music from your band.
So I really love the literary world. There's a lot of things I also don't like about it. But anyway, that really informed the aesthetic, was trying to be a company that would be truth-telling, even if it was through fiction, which is make-believe, but in a rugged and unafraid kind of way.
And what was it about the darker books that you were attracted to?
I don't know. My taste in art, whether it's music, painting, dance, literature, it just runs dark. I don't know. I don't really know why. I remember my parents asking me this when I was like 20 years old, when I was really started playing seriously in these noisy, bands making music that was ugly to a lot of people, and them asking why is this, and I don't really know. It's my taste. It's not ultimately so much of what I do at Akashic Books comes down to taste. I think that the social and political mission is almost secondary to the aesthetic mission. And my tastes can run, towards outsider voices or outsider musicians or outlaws. And that's not because I'm trying to publish books in an obscure manner. I want to sell millions of books. Yeah. I'm very ambitious. But so by publishing outsider voices, it isn't simply because I'm trying to dwell on the fringes of society, which is what it would look like if you saw, playing punk music, punk bands, and then sort of renegade literature. But in fact, I'm totally a populist. Like, I like singing along to the Beyonce song or to the Rihanna song. I want to be. I like sports. I like being in a stadium with 50,000 people all cheering for the same thing. So I'm not actually actively trying to be obscure in what I do.
Does that clash when you're in the indie world that you want to sell millions of books? Because sometimes people feel it's more pure the less books you sell.
I don't think it doesn't clash in the book world. And in fact, I think a lot of the other independent book publishers are, that I see as peers, are even more commercially minded than we are. There's many indie publishers that make us look very commercial. Poetry publishers. Right down the hall from us here in this building, there's a wonderful independent book publishing company called Archipelago Books. 95% of what they publish is books in translation, which, if it's hard enough to keep an independent book publishing company financially afloat, if you add in translation costs, you're basically sunk. They are a nonprofit company. That's sort of their business model. But again, if you compare what we're doing to what they're doing, you know, we look crassly commercial. and I'm not accusing us of being crassly commercial. We're not. But it's an interesting world. Yeah, I think in the indie music, fortunately, book publishing is not burdened the way music was in the independent world of this question of selling out. I'm glad to be free of that framework, and which I think is mostly a thing of the past. There's not a lot of people, I don't think, talking about selling out anymore. It's a different world than it was 15 or 20 years ago culturally. And in many other ways.
People want to eat.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it often came down to the issue of selling out and major labels and corporate culture companies, etc. To me, the litmus test has always been health insurance. Can you afford health insurance? And I remember when my band was signing to Geffen, and there were people in the independent music world who felt we were sort of selling out or were betraying something, which was complete bullshit. The fact is we were one of the top indie rock bands at the time with Touch and Go Records, one of the best indie labels. We were one of the most successful bands. So and we were in Rolling Stone magazine and all the other places, and yet none of us had health insurance. We were making money off our records and off touring, enough to pay rent, enough to eat, but not enough to have health insurance. And that was like the top of the indie game. So to me, it's a non-argument. It's just not an issue. If you feel that your favorite bands shouldn't have to bother themselves with whether or not they have health insurance, to me, health insurance is like what defines you as a sort of a middle-class person. You know, in Europe, a lot of European countries, you know, just everyone has health insurance, and it helps to create a middle class. And so that was I could never deal with this issue of trying to hold musicians back. And that's the way I feel about book publishing. Is we have authors who have, in a sense, used Akashic as a stepping stone. Okay. We might publish their first book, and then their next book they'll move up to a bigger book publishing company, and people say to me, "Does that bum you out?" And I say, "No. If I were offering them $100,000 and they moved, maybe that would bum me out. I'm offering them $2,000. That's going to get them 1 month of health insurance, and then that doesn't. And then they
just
don't
for
have
themselves.
Just for themselves, and then they don't have money left for rent. So." But there are a lot of other indie publishers who do have this thing of feeling betrayed by authors who move on, and I just can't go there. Who is anyone to think that they can decide what's better for a musician or an author than the musician or the author? We get to, if you're lucky, you get to control your own destiny, and that's to think that these outside that someone else knows what's better for an author than the author does, to me is sort of absurd.
Did you personally have to deal with any kind of dissent because you're doing this independent thing with the publishing and then you just signed the major label deal?
A little bit. Yeah, I mean, in our social world, in the music world at that time, in 1996 when we signed the deal, you know, we lost a couple of friends. Yeah. But it wasn't there's so much discussion around these issues that they take on a life of their own. In terms of how it actually impacted my life personally. It didn't impact it too much. I was disappointed in the reactions of a small handful of people. But mostly I was just annoyed to see music fanzines endlessly debating these issues that struck me as strictly full-on first world type of conversation to be having, in very, very indulgent, and you know, not a little bit out of touch with the real world. If all these musicians came from lower class or working class backgrounds, these conversations wouldn't even be happening. They're only happening because a lot of the people are privileged.
So when you go from doing the label Does it release the pressure of not having to worry about if Akashic, like you're not supporting yourself with Akashic?
Well, now I am.
I mean, but at that time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, initially.
Oh, I wouldn't, I can't imagine a better way to start a book publishing company, because we published our first book in 1997, and up until around 2002, I was still a professional musician or a touring musician, whatever you want to call it, making a good living. And so I had 5 years to develop this hobby that then became a new profession for me. But I had 4 or 5 years of doing it while there was no pressure on the book publishing company, which is just really great, because it's really, really hard to make any money publishing books. And the only hope of it, well, either lightning is going to strike and you're going to get super lucky, or you're going to build up a book publishing company where you have enough books sort of generating trickles of income to be able to build it up. It takes time to build that. So the first 5 years was like a free ride in a sense. I mean, I had to sink money into it, but my band was prosperous enough that I could afford to do that.
Okay.
And I don't know that because it was a hobby and I never intended to do a book publishing company, had it started in any other way, I don't know that it would have ever come together like it has.
Were there ever moments when you were thinking of like ending it?
Oh, many moments. Are you talking about just today? There's only been 4 or 5 of those moments today.
And what is it all financial or mainly financial whenever you think of,
well,
this is tough?
It's actually usually not financial.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's usually either personal or cultural. Early on, we published a book, a great novel by an author who I became very friendly with. We became close friends. And then this author, we published the author's second book, and the person was really, really, really disappointed that their books weren't selling better. And they were emotionally unstable, which I knew all along and was fine with me. You know, I have that's not an issue for me. Musicians, writers, me, a lot of us are emotionally unstable. But this writer ended up, I became the focus of this writer's frustration, but the writer became sort of obsessed with me in an psychologically unhealthy kind of way, and ended up trying to sue me, saying that I was enriching myself off the 2,000 copies of the book that had been sold, and that was really early on, and I thought I can't keep doing this if there's a lot of thanklessness to the job, but then to be kicked in the teeth by the very person you're intending to try to support by doing a book publishing company was a really, really, really tough pill to swallow. And so that made me think, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this, I can't get as close to my authors, which was a bummer because I wanted to be close to the authors. And then what I realized, what I ended up coming around to, which was very helpful, was realizing, okay, I don't mind doing business and working with crazy people. Yeah. That's the way it's been my whole life. My family's crazy. I'm crazy. So many of my close friends are crazy, and I value that. However, there's good crazy and there's bad crazy. Just because someone's crazy doesn't mean that they're going to stab you in the back. Some of the craziest people who I know have the biggest hearts and are the most generous people. Yeah. And so I kind of came around to the goal of, before we sign up an author, let's try to really figure out what their personality is like. And so we began, in a sense, screening the personalities of our authors. And that was in around the year 2000 that we started doing that. And that method of acquiring books where, first of all, the book has to be amazing. That's the most important thing. But a close second is, who is the author? Are they a good person? Do they make, other than writing great books, do they make the world a better place? Do they treat the people around them well? And so when when we find a book that we really like, but we don't know the author, we snoop. We find people who know them, and we ask about them. Okay, there's this author's book is absolutely incredible, but it's this person's 5th book, and if we were to publish it, we would be the 5th publisher. Why is there a different publisher every time this author publishes a book? Well, the answer might be, and this has happened before, because the person's an asshole. So that's not right for us. And I don't care how much your book sells. We're a small staff. We're sensitive people, and so we try to screen out the people that don't know how to treat other people well. And this is, always feel I need to point this out. I'm not talking about a specific type of person. If you look at our list, you will see Jamaicans, Nigerians, Cubans, Americans, Canadians, and people across, with different religious views. I think that I'm talking about a universal value. I'm not talking about a specific Judeo-Christian way of treating people. I think treating other people with respect is something that crosses all cultures, and the people that are more respectful. I don't know if I quite believe in karma because I'm not religious, but I do think that, what goes around comes around.
So does that process take place unbeknownst to them? Like you get your manuscript, you like the book, and then it's like, okay, now we're gonna
we don't want them to know, because also if we don't end up doing the book and they know that we were asking around about them, it'll make them more mad at us, and it also could get their friends in trouble. So it is snooping. It is it's done covertly, so that when I'm asking, I always start the email, please don't tell so-and-so that I'm emailing you about this, but I know you're friendly with them, and I just wanted to let you know. I'm not asking you, are they a good writer or not? We've made that decision for ourselves, how we feel about the writing. What I'm asking you is, how do they treat the people around them?
So once you've chosen somebody, do you have to tamper people to have expectations when they're signing to a small press that it's only going to be a certain number of copies to begin with, or do people come with too high hopes? Yeah,
and that's a great question. Almost everybody's hopes are too high, and book publishing is a widely misunderstood business. That's becoming less and less the case, but I think for a lot of years, the general public, as well as a lot of authors, were sort of protected against the reality of how small the numbers are that books sell. Books sell in such small quantities. Some books sell in huge quantities, but the vast, vast majority sell anywhere, from 500 to 5,000 copies. That's probably 95% of the books that are published fall within that range, or maybe I would even say 50 to 5,000, because there's a lot of self-publishing these days and a lot of books that don't even sell 500 copies. And so, one of the challenges for us is to try to bring authors, to get them to appreciate the reality of the marketplace, broadly speaking, and specifically the indie world. But to do this in a way that doesn't shatter their dreams or doesn't make them feel that we're not going to be working hard to sell their books. I want to sell 1 million books, but we're more likely to sell 2,000, and so I definitely spend a lot of time with authors trying to frame what we see as a success. And in fact, in my mind, almost every book that you see on the shelf here is a success. We're very frugal. We don't get ahead of ourselves. I'm really, really, really proud of the books that are on the list. and we do really well by our authors.
Yeah.
We love we love getting to work with them and getting to publish their work, and in return, we work tirelessly.
Mm-hmm.
We're an extremely hardworking publishing company.
Yeah.
I would say, like, person for person, I'd be surprised if there was a publishing company that worked harder than we do. And that's one of the main resources that we bring to the table as a publishing company.
Okay. Yeah,
we have. I may have strange interests, or we may dress casually, or I may curse a lot. I may, go to bars a lot. Not that I do that much, but anyway, the point being, but when it comes to the written word, we dot our I's and we cross our T's. We take it very seriously.
Yeah. Talking about the expectation, I interviewed Mike Sniper from Capture Tracks Records. Yeah, they're in Brooklyn. And he was saying the same thing too, that he has to tell people, like, this big thing could happen, but it may not. And you have to, don't quit your day job.
Yeah, that's an important thing.
Because people come and they want, like, oh, I'm going to be this huge star. And it's like, you don't know that. But he had brought up something interesting about, he saw great examples of people coming, say, from major labels to an independent label, but not from in the reverse. Have you seen that or similar in books?
I see a lot of it going in both directions. Okay. Yeah. The book publishing companies, the big ones, have largely turned their backs on their non-best-selling writers, and that has really sped up in the past 5, 6, 7 years. So there's more and more writers that might have 5 or 6 books on Simon & Schuster or Random House who are now coming to Akashic or 7 Stories or one of the other good independents. And that's a dynamic. It's sad for the authors that if their publishing home is turning its back on them. Yeah. But from our perspective, sometimes it can work out really, really well, because a sales figure that might be unimpressive for a big company might be great for us. And so we have a low overhead, and it's this. I actually feel like it's a luxury to be a small company with a low overhead, so that if we can sell 5,000 copies of a book, that's a really big success. And, even on a strictly financial level, whereas the big companies, they're so big and their advances are so big that if you sell 5,000 copies of something, it's a failure. Yeah. And a lot of those writers end up feeling like failures, like they're failures and their books are failures. And that's not a dynamic here at Akashic, and it truly feels like a luxury.
And failure doesn't have anything to do, or necessarily, with the content.
Yeah, but the author will feel that the content, that their book itself is a failure. Yeah. That's what so many authors are left feeling when they go with the big companies. And again, I'm not a purist. I'm not going to. I have my problems with the big companies, but I'm all for authors getting paid. Yeah. There was just a book today. We just had an editorial meeting an hour and a half ago, and there's a book that we're looking at, and the author, it's a photographer, just got a really big offer, and that's fine. And frankly, because again, one of my goals is to not be redundant. If we're looking at a book and another publisher also wants to do the book, most of the time we'll just kind of recuse ourselves. If it's going to have a good home over there, then we're not really needed. Yeah. That doesn't apply fully across our list, because at this point we've published more than 400 books, and so there's plenty of books that other people would have also liked to publish. But it is a principle that we still do pay attention to. Are we needed in this situation? Okay.
So when an author is coming from a big publisher, what are they usually coming to you? Like, what are their expectations?
I think their expectations are, their hopes are to be treated with respect, and that's something that we can give them. If they are coming from a big company, occasionally you'll find an author who's moving from a big company to a smaller company for ethical reasons. But much more often, it's simply that the big companies won't have them anymore. And so they're feeling dejected, and they are just really appreciative to find a company that not only likes their work and wants to invest in their work, but is going to return every phone call and is going to be super responsive, and that's going to include them as much as they want to be included in the cover design of their book and all other matters. It's going to treat them like a human and an artist, not like a product.
Yeah, because I had a friend, he had published with a major publisher, a nonfiction book, and the publicist was there the whole time up until the book. They did one for a book signing in Barnes & Noble. Had the ad, and then he goes to the book signing. I was there, and it's like the publicist, they stopped returning his phone calls, and that was it they were done.
Yeah.
With the publicity, and he made the assumption, oh, I'm on a major publisher, I'm set.
I think it's very frustrating, and I know this experience as a musician, but I think it's very frustrating for authors to be signed to an enormous multinational company and then to not be the beneficiary of any of that largesse, or very little of it, or have it be completely front-loaded. Oh, okay, the book's been out a week, and it's not skyrocketing on the bestseller list, and suddenly the publicist is no longer paying any attention. It's ridiculous how frequently I get emails or phone calls from friends who have books on major publishing companies asking me for help in terms of setting up a book tour, or how, advice on how to set up a book tour. And it's just so ironic, because here we are pinching pennies, and yet we're able to kind of help an author more than their multinational parent company.
So are you looking, or how do you devise that? Because I imagine you're looking at it more long-term. You release a book long-term as opposed to great first-week sales. Like, is that built into the promotion?
Yeah. Definitely looking at it long-term, especially since most of the books that we publish, they're not going to, in the first week, they're not going to jump out of the box really strong. Occasionally we have a book, like we're doing a cookbook with Ziggy Marley, which I'm incredibly proud of.
Nice.
And that's a book that will, as soon as it's published, I'm not saying it's going to rocket to the bestseller list, but it's going to have a big audience as soon as it's published. That's more the exception than the rule. So we have to really stick with it and build brick by brick. Also, a big factor is how invested is the author. If the author is willing to keep pounding the pavement along with us, we can keep going for a long time.
Now, is that something you talk to people about at the beginning?
Yeah.
To promote, like, what are they going to do?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We need the author's help. We do publish hermits sometimes, but it just makes it that much harder to sell a book if the author isn't helping to make connections. To be clear, it's our job to promote the book. That's our job. But we're going to be able to do our job much better if we're synced up with the author. And to me, that this is a little bit related to, I'm comfortable placing those expectations on an author, in part because of my music background. For musicians and bands, at least in my experience, you weren't waiting around for the record label to make you famous. You were playing shows and booking yourself and sleeping on floors or sleeping in motels if you could afford it. And bands understand themselves to be independent units that are responsible for themselves, whereas authors are less like that. Authors, generally speaking, there's plenty of exceptions, but generally speaking, they don't see themselves, in my mind, independent enough from their publisher. However, there's also some very tangible reasons for that. A band plays a gig and they get paid. An author might get paid for some speaking engagements, and famous authors get paid a lot, but your average author can't just go tour the country because you're not even getting paid $50. It's just promotion. So when you get paid for appearing publicly, like a band does, that of course greatly helps you to understand yourself as independent.
Yeah.
Whereas with an author, if you're going around doing like a bookstore tour, you're not really an independent business. You're just promoting your book. So it's understandable that authors aren't as independent as musicians are. But I still greatly value when authors take a lot of initiative and are savvy in what they do, and it makes a big difference from our perspective in terms of both working with them but selling books, just trying to sell books.
Yeah. Because I feel like in some ways that authors are still holding on to the paradigm of they'll get published and the publisher is going to make them big. Well, for so long, independent artists, you release your own, whether it was tapes or 45s, you were doing it yourself, like you were saying. And that there's many authors that still hold on. Because I know someone, they just finished their manuscript, and their thing is to get signed to a big publisher, and like they won't even consider self-publishing or independent because this big publisher is going to do it.
Yeah. I agree. I agree that authors, they also, I mean, there's not, there aren't a lot of people showing authors different ways of getting out there in the world. Whereas in music, rock and roll, hip hop, jazz, whatever, there's public communities that are enthusiastically supporting it. And literature doesn't have that at the same level.
Okay. Do you think that will change, or how that could change?
I think it is changing. I think it's changing for the better. I definitely do. But I think on a certain level, it's hard for literature to compete with other art forms. Music speaks to pretty much everybody on the planet, you know.
Yeah.
If there's 6 billion people, music speaks to 5.9 billion of them.
Yeah.
And literature is just not that way. Film and music are extremely popular. In part, they hit you immediately. So there's just instantaneous emotional payoff to listening to music. Yeah. And so literature doesn't have that. And
there's a commitment when you pick up a book.
Yeah, and it's more cerebral. It's more in your brain. And it requires, you could have dropped out of kindergarten and you could still obviously love music deep within your heart. Whereas literature it requires more education, and it's more reading books there's a lot of people that just don't read a lot of books, and it's no reflection on them or their character. It's just different things appeal to different people. But literature doesn't have that universality that music and film do. And I also think the book business needs to do a much better job of showing the world, we have books for you. Okay. I don't care what your background is. There's books that will appeal to you. So I do think that the onus, to a large extent, is on the book publishing industry to promote books and sell books in a way that touches more people, not just the overeducated, which is, you know, the New York literary establishment. It's just very, very educated, privileged people. And to me, the future of literature, it needs to break out of that. There needs to be more books for different types of people, and not just books for them, but engaging communities in different ways. That's one of my main motivations for being the co-founder of the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is New York City's biggest free book festival. And to me, the Brooklyn Book Festival, like a lot of other great book festivals, like the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, like the Miami Book Fair, like Calabash, which is the best book fair and book event in the world. It's in Jamaica. And these festivals and events do a great job of connecting books to readers. And so that's part of what my commitment to the Brooklyn Book Festival is about.
Okay. And for your music, do you get to balance? Like, how do you balance both?
Well, I'm 95% book publisher. It's not much of a balance. There's not a lot of balance there, especially since I'm also a father of two kids, two boys that are 8 and 10, and I'm also a husband. So between running Akashic and trying to be a good father, it doesn't leave a lot of time, but perhaps more significantly, energy. Now, having said that, I am playing music, and I do both of two of my old bands, Girls Against Boys and Soul Side, still do play on occasion, and I'm also involved in a new musical project with some old friends, which could get off the ground and be a new band that I'm really excited about. So I'm actually there's been more music in my life in the past 2 or 3 years than in the 10 years before that. But I'm still spending way more time with my head buried in books than I am playing my bass guitar.
Do you miss that?
I do. I miss it a lot, but there's also a lot I don't miss. I don't really miss the lifestyle of a musician.
Like the touring part?
Yeah, the touring. I'm lucky enough to have done many years of touring, toured the United States and Europe so many times, and other places as well. And that was really great. But I feel like I got a lot of that in terms of a musician's lifestyle and getting to party and getting to meet incredibly talented musicians and share the stage with other musicians and have that inspiration. I'm just so glad that I had that. But these days, I'm most happy when I'm not traveling. So I miss having music in my life more. I really love playing music. But the trappings of a musician's lifestyle, I'm happy to not be doing that.
And actually, what is some music you would recommend? What are some of your favorite stuff all time? All-time favorite stuff.
All-time favorite
a couple
stuff.
Things.
This goes back to me saying earlier that I'm a populist and I want to be singing the same thing as everybody else. I mean, I do have some favorites that are, very obscure, but Bob Marley is my religion. As an atheist Jew, Bob Marley is my religion, and Bob Marley's music just means so much to me, and no matter how many thousands of times I've listened to those songs, they still move me viscerally immediately. I really love the punk band Minor Threat. Minor Threat's music is just so incredible. And as musicians, the 4 or 5 members, depending on what era they were in, well, maybe era is the wrong word because the band didn't exist for that long. But I really love Minor Threat's music. Bad Brains, also extremely important to me. In terms of what I listen to most of the music I listen to is like reggae and hip hop. A lot more so than punk. To me, when I listen to punk music these days, it's really sort of a small group of bands that I thought were the best. I have a much bigger passion for reggae music and for hip hop and R&B. Is just more where it's just what appeals to me. Fela also is is extremely important. But yeah.
Okay. Nice. And were you looking forward to this year? Like books, highlights of the books?
In terms of my own publishing program?
Or any books you're like really excited about, or is it too soon?
Yeah, no. Well, as I mentioned, this Ziggy Marley cookbook, I'm really happy about. We've never published a cookbook before, and so we put a lot of work into it because we want it to be, like I said before, we want it to be really top notch. We don't want it to be anything to be thrown together. We want the Ziggy Marley cookbook to be, and it is, a real cookbook, not just You love Ziggy Marley's music?
Yeah.
Try his food. No, this is a serious cookbook with great recipes. It's beautiful, beautiful. It's a family cookbook. His whole family was involved. His wife, his children, some of his siblings, and it's all inspired. Not all, but a lot of it is inspired by his parents, Bob and Rita Marley. And if anyone would have said to me when I started book publishing, what would a dream of yours have been? One of my dreams would have been to be publishing books with members of the Marley family.
There you go.
So it's absolutely a total dream come true. In another area, one book I'm extremely excited about as well is a book called Hurricane Street by Ron Kovic. Ron Kovic wrote the book Born on the 4th of July, which was turned into Oliver Stone, turned it into an Oscar, won Best Picture of the Year. I can't remember what year it was, but it was starred Tom Cruise. I was never much of a Tom Cruise fan, but after working with this author, Ron Kovic, it gave me a lot more respect for Tom Cruise. But about 10 years ago, we reissued Born on the 4th of July. Somehow it had fallen out of print. Yeah. And we brought it back because it's an anti-war American classic. It's the story of it's a true story. It's Ron Kovic's own life story. In the movie, Tom Cruise plays Ron, and it's about a patriotic soldier who goes to the Vietnam War to serve his country and does a couple tours of duty, and then gets terribly injured and paralyzed from his mid-chest down. And upon returning to the United States and seeing the deplorable conditions in the hospitals that he was living in, it turned him into an anti-war activist. And then since the early 70s, Ron Kovic has become one of the leading anti-war activists in this country. And miraculously, Ron is still alive. Yeah. On July 4th this year, he turned 70 years old. So on July 4th, we are publishing his brand new book, Hurricane Street, simultaneous with a 40th anniversary edition of Born on the 4th of July, for which Bruce Springsteen just wrote us a brand new introduction.
Nice.
And the new book, Hurricane Street, is about, it's another memoir, it's a true story about this political movement that he started in the spring of 1974 when he was in and out of VA hospitals. And the conditions were still terrible. And today, in 2016, the conditions are still not good enough. Yeah. If we're going to throw these young men and women into harm's way, and that's a whole separate matter, why are we going to war? But leaving that aside, there are wars, and these young people come back terribly injured. And if we've sacrificed their bodies, we need to treat them like royalty. And so in 1974, Ron and some fellow veterans, badly injured fellow veterans, were sick and tired of being treated like shit in these hospitals. And so they banded together and started something called the American Veterans Movement. And they took over the office of Senator Alan Cranston in Los Angeles. They went in there supposedly just to have a meeting, but then they didn't leave. And so you have all these guys in wheelchairs with bags coming out of their bodies. And they said, we're not leaving until the United States government, the Nixon administration, promises to improve conditions. And, the government tried to wait them out, and it was difficult for them to keep this protest going because these guys need daily, hourly help because they were very badly injured. And also, a lot of them, pretty much almost all of them, were suffering from PTSD. Okay. So it's not just physical injuries; it's severe psychological injuries as well. So this book is a book about the couple of weeks that these guys and men and women camped out in Senator Cranston's office in an ultimately successful political action. They forced the U.S. government's hand and made them improve the conditions. One of the very special things about the book is that it's told, there's actually a lot of humor in it. So for Ron, trying to kind of cajole his fellow veterans into staying in the senator's office there was a lot of absurdity in it, which was probably not funny at the time. But Ron looks back on it with, this was 1974, so this is a long time ago. It was over 40 years ago. So he has some distance from it now, and he can see some of the humor in how they comported themselves and how they approached this political action. It's not a humor book at all, but it's a good read, and it's not like a relentlessly traumatizing read, because Ron's a great storyteller, and it was a righteous battle that they fought and won.
No, that sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
And best place for people to keep up online with the books and your music?
We're on, all the social media outlets, our website. We have a really good website, akashicbooks.com, which is AKASHIC books.com. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah,
this is wonderful. Thank you. And there you have it, my conversation with Johnny Temple here on episode number 89 of Talk Music Talk. Again, Akashic Books, Johnny Temple. The website, akashicbooks.com. As for me, you should check me out online at talkmusictalk.com, where you can find out all about the podcast. I have my own website also, which is thisisboyce.com. Boyce is spelled B-O-I-C-E. I am an author myself, so you can read excerpts from my novels. I am a singer and a songwriter, so you can check out my music there also. If you are on Instagram, follow me at thisisboyce. You'll see lots of pictures of the guests, including Johnny. And don't forget, again, to download the free app, Talk Music Talk. That's right, for iPhone and Android, wherever you get your apps. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, and there will be a next time. This one's for you, Liz.